So this video is going to show you how to use a link in the shape of a button. So we're going to be styling a link to look like a button. There is a button tag in HTML, but you should never use it as a link. Now I'm trying to teach you good habits and to understand what the rules of the web are. And the button tag is only to trigger JavaScript events. And we're not touching that with a barge pole, as I've mentioned before. Or it's to submit a form. And we've removed the requirements for forms out of the unit. You're not having to learn how to create a form. So that leaves us in a dilemma of how can we do a button that says, for instance, enroll at Swinburne now, since it's not submitting a form and it's not triggering any JavaScript. Well, what we can do is use CSS to style our link so that it looks like a button, but in fact it just acts as a link. And the following video will show you how to do that. Now, we're going to show you how to style this link as a button. I've entered it as a normal old link, just like the other video that showed you how to create links in the text. This time I've got the link going to Swinburne website. There we go. I haven't put the title attribute because I think it's a bit weird having a button with a tooltip, but it's up to you if you want to do that. Now, I've used the text enroll at Swinburne now. Why have I done that instead of saying click to go to Swinburne website? Well, ideally with a button, and indeed with any link, you want to give the user an action. Give them something to look forward to when they click that button. Telling them where the button links to, a little bit boring. Telling them what they can do, sign up for our newsletter, see our winter specials, enroll at Swinburne now. That is what we call a call to action. And I do recommend that when you make a button, unless it's something that you need to follow an established requirement such as submit for a form, with ones like this, I would recommend putting a call to action there so that it entices the person to click through. Now, there is one problem with us using the Swinburne website as an example. I'm going to click on the link. And this is the point where people start freaking out going, oh no, it's not taking me through. The link is broken. I've coded something wrong. And then they spend the next 2 hours trying to figure out what is wrong in this link, only to discover it's not a problem with the link. If I right click on this and open it in a new tab, there we go. It's open, no problem at all. So what is going on here that it's not working? Well, this goes to the history of the web. You might remember from the video that looks at the history of web design that back in the 90s we had these things called frames, which meant that when you updated one section of a web page, it was actually loading a separate web page entirely. And that way, you know, I could have my navigation bar here and my main page here, and I didn't need to reload the entire of everything every time I clicked a link. Basically, the link here would update this particular web page, which is in a frame. This is a frame. And many websites have security features that prevent them from opening within frames. Google, I believe, is one as well. So if I change swinburne.edu.au to google.com, let's go and click on that. And again, it ain't working. And like I said, that is actually a feature, not a bug. So if you have decided to link to a site like Swinburne in your project, and you're thinking, oh no, the link's not working, am I going to lose marks? The answer is no, you are not going to lose marks. The lecturers are fully aware of this being a security feature that many websites have, and it's one that you can't really work around, obviously. They don't want their websites to open on another website because, you know, there could be malicious reasons why people want to masquerade as the Swinburne website or the Google website. So for that reason, we just roll with it. we just say, okay, that's not going to open. That's okay. We can right click and open it in a new website and that will be fine. Okay, so that taken care of. How do we style this as a button? For that, we need to go to the CSS. So now I'm in the CSS and we start off very similarly to how we styled our links in the last video. We're just going to put A for our anchor. And then I'm going to say, okay, I want a background color because that's typically what you would do with a button. So background hyphen color, and I'm going to use that lovely teal color. Okay, so there's a few problems with using this as a button. The first one that jumps out at me is there is no padding around the text. For readability, you need to have some space around things. You can't have text running into the edge of an object. So let's add some padding, and that's P-A-D-D-I-N-G, padding. And I can just put 10 pixels, and that will add 10 pixels around either side. Now you can adjust these things by saying padding top, left, right, bottom. But the other thing you can do is add them all in the one line. What this is telling the browser is that the padding is 10 pixels. That means 10 pixels on every side. So if we look up here, we've got it at the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. Why did I tell you it in that order? Because that's the order you need to enter it here if you want to be bespoke. If I wanted to have 10 pixels at the top, 20 pixels to the right, 30 at the bottom, and 40 to the left, I would have to say 10 pixels because it goes clockwise from the top, 20 pixels to the right, 30 pixels to the bottom, 40 pixels to the left. Now let's see what that does. Oh, it looks dreadful, but we can see that it works. Now, just say we wanted 10 pixels to the top and bottom, and we just want a bit of extra padding to the right and left. I can say 10 pixels, 20 pixels, so that's top, right, bottom, left, or if I'm amazingly lazy, I can actually just delete the second instance, because if you look at this, it's repeating the same thing twice. It's saying 10 pixels, 20 pixels. Repeat that idea, 10 pixels, 20 pixels. And I believe coders are inherently lazy people who like elegant code. That means they don't have to type much. And so as a result, this says exactly the same thing, and you can save yourself a little bit of effort and just type the top, bottom, and the right, left. So there we go. It's looking a little bit more buttony now. And of course, you can enter whatever amounts you want there. What else will make this look a bit more buttony? Let's give it rounded edges. We'll talk more about that next week when we're talking about images and borders. But for now, what I can do is say border radius. And, I'm going to say 10 pixels and see what that looks like. Oh, that's not looking bad at all. There we go. That's looking pretty buttony, except for the text. The text looks dreadful. So we need to change the color. And we'll do that color white. We'll talk about hex codes and color when we get to the color section of the unit. But for now, I can just type in named colors like white. And let's get rid of the underline. That looks just a wee bit odd. So I'm going to say text decoration none. Groovy, groovy. Okay, so we now have a button. And we can see it's a link because the moment I hover over it, my cursor turns into a little hand. And the good thing is, because it's the entire link, even if I just try and sneak in the corner, there we go, it's still recognizing that as the link rather than you having to go over the text itself. So this is all working really nicely. Now let's change our states, just like we did with the plain old garden variety links in the other video. So I'm going to have a link, and all I'm going to do is change the background colors here. So I'm going to make sure our background color stays teal here. I'm going to, hang on, I'm just going to open my book and find these colours that I named last time. So I'm using the same colours rather than reinventing the wheel. Okie dokie. Okay, so that was our visited colour. So now I'm going to say a visited. Let's actually do sort of a dark grey or something like that. I don't actually, you know what? I don't think you need to change the colour for visited. You don't usually do that with a button, so I'm going to keep that as teal. A hover, because remember we've got to do this in the specific order. Link, visited, hover. So we're going to change that one to the, I think deep pink will be nice and dramatic. So a hover, background colour, deep pink. And do remember, if you're changing the saturation shade, if you're making it really light, do remember to reverse that text out. So if I were to use a really, really light teal at any stage, I would need to make sure the text is black. We'll talk more about accessibility and color contrast in another class. Okay, there we go. And the last one is a active. And this time the background color will be medium violet red. Groovy. Let's save this. Let's see if this works. There we go. You can see when I click on it, it turns that darker color. Now you will use much, much nicer colors than I am using here, of course. Now, the next thing I want to show you, so we're pretty sure this is very buttony. This is a nice buttony button. Let's add some text before it. So if I say paragraph, here is a bunch of text about enrolling at Swinburne. Whoops. Okay. So we've got a line break because I've ended the P here. Now, if I instead cut that and end it after the link, see how it's now what we call inline. It's actually placed within the text itself, and you might decide you never, ever, ever, ever want that to happen. So in that case, this is where it's more, the rest of it is more complex than I normally would deal with in week 2. So this is why this video is optional, and you might be coming back to it later when you feel more confident with HTML. But to make sure that any time we place this, we're going to have a nice bit of a gap around it, we're going to say display block. Okay. And now we have the problem that it is way, 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 way too wide. I'm just going to test something. Inline block. That's not what we want. No, so we need block. So the problem here is that either the element is inline, in which case there's no line break before and after, or it's a block, it has a line break before and after, but then by default it is 100% wide. So what we also need to do with this is set a width, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for a button, because if we're going to create a button, you want a consistency of design across your pages, and so having it the same width is a really good way to reinforce that design. Now we talk about width when we deal with images as well, but let's just do that now. This is a lot of code for your second week. So, if this is really confusing you, don't worry about it. Just do normal links and then come back to this if you need a button later. So we're going to set the width, and I might just set that to be, hang on, how many letters do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Let's try 20M. M we'll talk more about when we get to typography, but just take it on red at the moment that is a unit of width for typography. So we could do 20M. If you wanted to keep it really simple, you could even do pixels. So we could say 200 pixels. There's many ways you can do it. Actually, I think that's looking pretty good. So the last thing we need to do for our button is our text is left align right now. It looks a little bit weird. So let's go text align. Ooh, and I'll try and spell center correctly. And remember, it is American spelling. So center, not center like we spell it. So center, C-E-N-T-E-R. We now have a bit of a button. Now, if you want a little bit more of a gap around it, we had the padding. The padding puts space between, within the element itself. So our link now has padding, which basically blows it out a bit like a bubble. It takes it out to the edges. To create more space outside the edges, you need margin, and it's the same concept. So we can say margin, and we can say, let's be excessive. We'll say 50 pixels to really show it working. There we go. And what that's done is it's put 50 above, to the right, to the bottom, and the left. That's why it's indented it right now. You can, again, make it different for the top, right, bottom, and left, just as we did with the padding. So I might say 50 pixels and then 0. And that would put the 50 above and the 50 below, but not put any to the left or right. And that may be what you're after. So this is how to create a simple button. Again, if it's really complex, have a go at it. Go to my code. You can click the fork if you want to play with it yourself and adjust the code and see what happens and copy and paste it into your own project and then muck about with some of the settings. Just if you do copy the code, make sure you change it to the needs of your own project. If you're doing a project all about coffee shops and suddenly I see a button saying enroll at Swinburne now, I know that you haven't actually understood it and adapted it to your own needs. It's fine to copy the code, but change it. And also the colors. The colors I've chosen are quite frankly terrible. I don't want to see this button in your project with, teal's fine, but this magenta rollover, unless that's your entire color palette. And if it's your color palette, hey, yay you, I hope it works because that's part of your assessment. But yeah, like I said, make sure you adapt the code to your own needs, and that's perfectly fine. So to recap, we added a link just as we would have done in the last video to add a plain old vanilla everyday link. We then went in here and styled it so that it looks like a button, and we did that by adding padding. We did that by changing, sorry about that, changing the text color, changing the text decoration. I think I'm just going to click next to it rather than select it to show you that. Changing the text decoration. We then made it a block so that it had a break before and after it and created a new line for it. We set the width because by default that would be 100%, and we wanted to make it a bit narrower and also establish a bit of a design convention across our different pages with the button looking the same way. And we set the text align to center so that it is nice and centered in that button. When we get to typography, I'll talk more about that. Do be sparing in centering your text, please. We also styled the link so that it had different colors depending on what the mouse is doing on it. There's one last thing I want to show you, and that is what happens if you have proper links as well as buttons. So for instance, if I were to make Swinburne here a link, okay, so what I've done here is see how now even text links appear as a button. Oh no, what are we going to do? Okay, so what we can do is have this as a special class, and that's one of the reasons this is actually a very complicated thing, creating the button. What we can do, and we'll talk more about this later in the semester, so this really is for people who are quite advanced and wanting to experiment a bit. In the button element, the link that is acting as a button, I need to add an attribute called class. And I'm just going to call that Ali button. Okay, so that's making sure it's got its own class specifically. So what we're doing down here in the CSS is currently we're styling the elements themselves. So the tags themselves, the A tag, the H1 tag, the P tag. But you can actually specify only do it to these particular ones by creating what we call a class that can apply to multiple elements. So here we're going to say if it's got Ali button, then do this. How do we do that? We basically say full stop Ali button. Make sure you use the same case. It is case sensitive. So instead of A, that's what we're going to do. And you see how now this one is styled and this one still has a bit of the styling. So we have to go through, and every time we've got A, we change that to dot Ali button. Dot Ali button. And this becomes our selector. This is really complex for your second week, and I'm sorry to do it to you, but we just thought that this is probably the best time to deal with doing buttons. And like I said, you can view this at any stage. There might be some of you watching the video who are actually in week 5 or 6 or 7, and that's cool too. This is all about you learning at your appropriate pace. And as you can see, now that I am using the class as the selector instead of the tag, we have separated this out. This up here does not have the class, so it's styling it as it would do an A tag, which is this hideous default purple for visited, blue for not visited, with an awful underline. And in fact, that's fine at the moment because we've got that embedded in the text. No worries. You can actually style that separately. And you could have, A color red or something like that. There we go. See how that's now red? Because we've styled the A tag, which is this. This has not been affected because this takes precedence. Class Ali button. And we've created our class by putting a full stop first. If it doesn't have a full stop, it's a tag. If it has a full stop, it's a custom class designed by you. And we've got Ali button and we've got all the instructions there. So this is complicated, but it makes a really, really, really nice design. So there we go. I was zoomed in, so I don't know if you could have seen all of these things while I was discussing it, unfortunately. So anyway, here's the red text that is styled by this bit. And here is the button that is designed by everything that has full stop Ali button. And we can still style all of the states of it as well, so which is fantastic.